What's up friends, I'm Tony, and there's more information out there than ever. We've created more data in the past couple of years than we had in the previous 5,000 years of humanity. If we don't find a way to consume that information mindfully, most of it starts turning into noise, and we start seeing the world as if we had a cloud around our heads that doesn't let us see things clearly. It might lead us to feel overwhelmed and to consume more and more information and retain less and less valuable knowledge from it. So today we're going to talk about mindful information consumption and the 4 elements that pull it all together. And we'll see how we can take action on each one of them. First of all, it's all about understanding where our attention goes on a daily basis, because that is the only way that we can work on taking it back. Once we take back our attention, once we regain our attention, then we need to be able to identify valuable information out of the ocean of information that has grown exponentially in recent years. Think about it as identifying signals within noise. When you dial down the noise, it's like getting rid of the cloud around your head and you start seeing the signals more clearly. So after having found that valuable information, it's all about focusing your attention on it so you can absorb it more effectively. Focusing involves letting go of distractions so that your attention falls naturally onto a single point. It's like a magnifying glass under the sun. This can be a very powerful thing, and we'll see why Warren Buffett and Bill Gates think the same way. And finally, since we've already decided that we found valuable information in the first place, it is crucial that we retain that information long term so we can apply it on our day-to-day lives. Consuming information mindfully has become a really important skill in the 21st century because we sometimes forget how valuable it is to know when to tune out of social media and when to tune out of the news so we can be present and spend time with our friends, spend time with our families and the people and the things that we care most about. In the past, I used to feel very overwhelmed with how much information I was consuming, but I still sat there in front of my TV or in front of my phone or looking at my computer thinking that there was so much more information I was still missing out on. But now that I've learned to be mindful with how I consume information, I found confidence in sometimes tuning out for most of the day, and then I just spend a couple of hours looking at new information because I know that it's valuable and I know how I will retain it over time after that. So let's look at the first point, which is regaining our attention. Taking back our attention. With the internet, we now have access to pretty much all of the knowledge of humankind. The downside is that usually this knowledge is buried under a lot of information that may not be useful and sometimes may even be false. This means that most of the information that we take in each day is something that we might consider noise. And the valuable knowledge that we would be able to apply on our day-to-day lives is hidden as signals within that noise. That means we need to dial down the noise to see the signals more clearly. Think of this as removing the cloud we might have around our heads. The first step we need to do in order to dial down the noise is to become aware of where we allocate our attention daily. We need to take a step back to really see where our attention is going and what we're doing each day. Most of us pay a lot of attention to what we eat daily, and we know that there are foods that can be good and some that can be bad for our health. And of course, we try to eat healthy food more often. The thing is that not all of us realize that the same thing happens with the information we consume. The same way that we take good care of the things we eat, we need to take care of our information diet. In my case, I started to realize that I was spending a lot of time on social media apps like Instagram, streaming on Netflix, or watching whatever the YouTube algorithm threw at me. That meant that I was spending a lot of time scrolling mindfully on my phone, or spending hours watching something that a month later I wouldn't have been able to recall. The real problem with this is that I personally wasn't enjoying myself doing all of this. I felt a sense of deep unsettlement that felt like a soft and distant voice that at the same time came from within, and it was telling me to do something differently. Thankfully, I decided to listen. The first thing I did was to take a good look at what was draining my attention, and in my case, it was social media and especially Instagram. I realized that it was giving me more anxiety than it did enjoyment, and that I wasn't really using it to genuinely connect with other people. Instead, I was watching other people's lives from this small and distorted window that painted a fabricated world that doesn't even come close to reality. That's when I decided that quitting the app altogether would be the best. But like for most people, the habit of clicking on that bright red icon and immediately seeing eye-catching images and faces that immediately had my attention hooked on scrolling through images and posts for hours each day was not easy to break at all. Building good habits and breaking old ones is a topic of another video, but what I'm trying to say say is that working through that, I eventually got to a point where now I'm happy with the relationship that I have with the app. I eventually stopped using it almost altogether. I didn't delete it because every once in a while I find myself needing to do something very specific on the app, and on those cases I find it very useful. And I also have a 15-minute daily limit set up on my phone, which I rarely have to break. I have done similar things with other social media apps and sources of information, and I am telling you all of this because this is an example of how you can regain your attention so you can then be able to allocate it with more intention. In short, regaining your attention comes down to elimination. Assess where your attention goes throughout the day, and then from there start eliminating the sources of information that you don't find valuable. And if it's hard to tell if it's valuable, it's better to eliminate it and then see if you actually need it and you can bring it back. Okay, so now that we started to regain our attention back from the noise, what do we do with it now? Well, so now that we know that we need to allocate it on signals instead of the noise, the question then becomes, how do we find high value information? The kind of information that will give us knowledge that we can apply on our day-to-day lives. In other words, how can we find information with high signal density, which in turn means less noise? And in here, what we need to do is very simple, but is very powerful. We need to flip the information flow. We need to retrieve instead of receive. Instead of consuming the information someone else wants you to consume for their own interest, which is literally what social media is designed to do to keep us engaged. And instead we need to seek out the information that we choose that we want to consume. So now that we have dialed down the noise, we have put ourselves in a situation in which we are much more capable of seeking the information that is actually valuable to us. And an excellent way to find the signals and to make the signals stand out is to ask the right questions. When you ask a question, you cut through the noise and you activate the part of your brain that focuses your attention, and it starts to look for the signals that will answer those questions. That way, when the answers and the signals come up, your mind will be primed and ready to absorb them. I'll give you a silly example. I don't really buy shoes unless I really need to, and this one time in college I needed to get a new pair. And that's when I started to ask myself the question, okay, which kind of shoes do I want? Up until then, I hadn't really noticed what kind of shoes people around campus were wearing. But after I had decided I wanted to get a new pair and I started asking myself that question, I started to walk around the library or between classes, looking at everyone's shoes to see which brands and which styles people were wearing to see which ones I liked. That information had been there all along, but I hadn't realized because I wasn't paying attention. And it wasn't until I started asking myself that very specific question that all of those signals started to pop up and I started to absorb that information. A more recent example is right now actually. I spent a long time privately working and developing something that I love, and now that I'm trying to share it with people, in part through this channel for example, the question I'm asking myself right now is, how can I build an audience of people that are interested in discovering the benefits of exercising their brains? So now I find myself absorbing new information on how to make better quality videos, doing the research on the topics that I want to talk about. And when I talk to people that also happen to be content creators, my mind is already primed to absorb more of the answers that they share with me. And that only starts by asking the right questions. So we have seen that by elimination, we have flipped the information flow to go from being receive to retrieve. And once you have your attention back, you start asking the right questions to cut through the noise and start noticing the signals and start noticing the answers. And once we notice these signals, we need to absorb them effectively, which takes us to our next point, which is focus. The ability to focus is a very important ability to work on when we're thinking about mindful information consumption. When I think of focus, I think of a magnifying glass under the sun. The same amount of light was already there. The magnifying glass isn't creating any new light, but what it does is that it redirects the rays of sunlight onto a single point. And this can even ignite a leaf on fire. Focus is not about restraining your attention or forcing it in any way. It is rather about letting go of distractions. And when we do this, our attention naturally falls onto a single point and whatever single point we place it at. Like any other ability, to train focus, you need to practice it. One excellent way to practice resting your attention on a single point is meditation. You can check out my previous video in which I talk a little bit about that. But in general, in meditation, what you do is that you place your attention on a single point, and when you notice your mind drifting off or your mind wandering off, you bring it back to that single point, and you do that over and over again. Over time, your mind starts to calm down and it wanders off less frequently. Another way you can train your focus is to start immersing yourself in the topic that you're trying to go through and forget about the world around you for a set period. It works a lot if you turn off notifications, if you remove distractions from your line of sight, and remember that multitasking is never a better way to getting things done, and it is better to give your full attention to one thing at a time. One great approach to use here might be to couple this with the Pomodoro method, in which you set a timer and dive into deep work for 25 minutes and then rest for 5 minutes, and you repeat that. I plan on talking more about the Pomodoro method and those techniques on later videos. When asked what was one of the most important traits that made them succeed on their respective fields, both Warren Buffett and Bill Gates said that without the ability to focus, they wouldn't have gotten to where they did. The ability to keep your attention and your energy focused on a single point for a prolonged period leads to great improvement over time and is a huge differentiator with other people that jump around different tasks and never focus on a single thing. And finally, once we've reallocated our attention into something that we find truly valuable and we're focusing on absorbing that information, the final point in this topic of mindful information consumption is that you actually retain that information long term. I talk about remembering information more effectively on another video you can also check out, but for now I will tell you that active recall is an excellent way to commit information to long-term memory. Active recall involves producing the information yourself after you have learned a topic, and this will exercise your brain on the topic, and it will also let you know if you truly know the topic as opposed to being vaguely familiar with it. To engage in active recall, you would quiz yourself on that topic and ask yourself questions on that topic that will force you to produce the answer yourself. That will reinforce your knowledge on it, and it will help you find out if you need to review the topic more. When it comes to information retention and actually remember the information that you learn, there's also something called spaced repetition, which involves you revisiting the topic some days after learning it for the first time, and then spaced out through time after that. And this will cement your information into your long-term memory. So there you have it. One really important skill for the 21st century is mindful information consumption. You first work on eliminating external things that might be draining your attention by dialing down the noise. Then you allocate that attention onto sources with high signal density by switching the information flow from receive to retrieve. Then you jump into deep focus by letting go of distractions and resting your attention on a single point. And finally, you use active recall and spaced repetition to retain that information and use it later on your day-to-day life. On the topic of letting go of noise, I am personally working on making high signal dense content, so feel free to let me know how I'm doing with that. My personal rule for creating content is that if I wouldn't be truly excited to find my kid consuming my content, I wouldn't post it at all. And I don't even have a kid yet, but that still works as a high bar I set to myself. This channel is all about exercising and taking good care of our brains, and one way to do that is by learning a brand new skill. I have a course on Skillshare where you can learn about computer programming, and you can learn to code in Python in 30 days by spending 15 minutes each day. And by the end, you'll even finish a final project which involves building a Python application. It is meant for complete beginners or for anyone who has learned to code in the past and is looking for a structured refresher. So the link is in the description if you want to check that out, and that will take you to a 1-month free trial of Skillshare as well. So that was it for today, so feel free to like and subscribe to the channel if you like this video. I am posting weekly now, so make sure to hit that bell button so you get notified whenever I post my next video. Comment down below with any thoughts or questions you might have, and I'll make sure to be around. But until then, I'll see you next time.